not even a communist yet. There's some communists who are probably looking at me like, JB, what the hell's wrong with you, man? Why aren't you here yet? But I'm growing. But at the same time, I'm not there yet. But I'm on my way. But the thing is that it's about giving people the grace and space in order to be able to learn. And people will make mistakes in the learning process. There's a Ryan Wagner said deprogramming takes a long time. Thank you.
It does. I mean, there were people who were not it's a little bit more common today, but I remember even like when I was in school, people, the whole thing, like same-sex relationships, like that was not a thing. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't mean that there weren't people at my school that were LGBTQ. There were, like there were always the people that we kind of figured that they were, but they didn't feel comfortable having a relationship, being out in the open and having a relationship with someone of the same sex, not during that time.
Yeah.
So it takes time.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't come out of the closet until almost 5 years ago.
See?
That's why.
There you go.
Yeah.
So I think when it comes to the left, I think one of the points Chris is getting at is that there seems to be no grace for people who are new to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Chris continues, says, now, fast forward to another issue that has pushed me out of this space. Besides the unscrupulous fighting, which gets to left nowhere, I've noticed that the left likes to talk tough with no action or a real concerted effort to fight for the cause in question. Example, telling people to punch a Nazi but too afraid to pressure progressives into Congress. The online left needs to come together on their present economic interests rather than just complaining on their YouTube channels. They feel that screaming into a bullhorn, getting beat up, and being unjustly detained by the police will somehow get them sympathy from a hypocritical populace who has no issue with voting for sexual deviant president. They think that somehow they would get noticed by the average American who has no issue with supporting a corrupt Eastern European country that has Nazis in it. The BLM protests prove nothing, only that dissent will never be considered by any liberal or Western leftists. Currently, there are only two outcomes that can produce results. One is waiting for the empire to fall, hoping that the left has a seat at the table when a new government forms, or the formation of a well-trained and organized militia that can actively stand against the tyranny of a nation which is inherently corrupt to the core. Complaining and yelling into the void on YouTube isn't going to cut it. Yelling in front of the Capitol steps and being mad because of an irrelevant member of Congress is dancing is not going to cut it. Marching down a city street where you need to get a permit and you are only allowed to protest when they tell you it's okay is not going to cut it. My disdain for the right and its trickery in pretending to care about Western corruption is justifiably true. But they are under no delusion that dissent can only be formed by fighting on all fronts, including having an armed militia. Not saying we need to go to war with our country.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think what Chris is trying to say here is that I don't think he's trying to tell you like not to protest, but I think what he's trying to say is that one protest, one rally, like that's not enough. You have to continue it. Now, I do know that there are more anti-war protests that are scheduled, that are coming up. There's one actually local here that's happening in Boston, but there's other ones that are scheduled as well. Like you have to continue it. Like, and this is the thing that Colin and I were asking when we were there is like, okay, so what's the next step? Like, what's step two? Because I've gone to multiple protests. I get really ramped up and excited and feel really energized after the fact. But then oftentimes there isn't a second step. And then the momentum dies and then people go back to their, respective corners. And I think that that's something that you have to be conscious of. like he said, like complaining on YouTube isn't going to cut it. Like that's not enough. Like, yeah, you'll be able to educate people that way, but there needs to be other things that are happening along with it. And the way that you really help people is like Rome has taught us a lot of this. You really got to help people within the community. It's not just the protests. It's not just, the YouTube shows, but actually talking to people on the ground. When you go to some of these protests, talking to people on the ground, when you do mutual aid, when we did Tour for the Poor in Boston, it wasn't just like, hey, here's all this food and items. We talked to people at the same time and say, listen, this is why we're helping people. And this is what we're about. That came from the Black Panthers. They were the ones that started that I know of, where they were actually telling people like, let me teach you about our government. Let me teach you about like socialism and why we need to help each other and build in our own communities. Right. And again, I take it back to the churches, because that's another thing that churches are really good at doing, or used to be. I'm not talking about these mega churches that just bring in a lot of money, but the not mega churches, I should say, not like the TD Jakes, like churches and stuff like that. But churches are really good at that as well. Giving back to the community, doing like these drives and donations where they give people clothes and food and stuff like that, and bringing people off the street. They used to be good about bringing people off the streets. I'm not sure if that's happening much anymore, but it used to be where they would actually take those people in. And so I think that when you look at where you are on the left, whether you're on the left or the right, community building has to happen. It has to be a part of it. If you're not doing community building, then we're not really getting anywhere. That's the big thing that I think Rome really taught me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just want to show this, and we'll get back to the article in a minute, but this was from Kwame Ture. And let's take a listen.
We have told you it's a fact. If you look at history, I have known no great man or no great woman that didn't belong to an organization, not one. The American capitalist system will so confuse some of us that we will actually think that we by ourselves can lead the people to their freedom. There's no such thing as Rambo or Superman. It exists only in Hollywood. Fidel Castro, as bad as he is, he needs the Communist Party of Cuba to help direct Cuba. V.I. Lenin, as rough as he is, he needed a Bolshevik party. Karl Marx was a great man, had to organize the International Workingmen's Association. The Honorable Marcus Garvey saw clear and long, but he needed the Universal Negro Improvement Association of the African Community Leagues. Patrice Lumumba was a great man. He needed organization. Harriet Tubman was a rough sister. She needed organization. Rosa Parks sat down so we can get up. She needed organization. Malcolm X so loved organization that when he left the Nation of Islam, he created two organizations, the Muslim Mosque Incorporated for Muslims and the African American Organization, inspired after the Organization of African Unity. Everywhere you will see the need for organization. Martin Luther King was a righteous man, but even he recognized the need for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And while Nelson Mandela is known all over the world, he still has the African National Congress. Every brother or sister who truly seeks to advance the world must belong to an organization. This we will not stop telling you.
Basically.
Kwame Ture has a lot of great things to say.